actually come. They come for the alcohol and the food. You guys are just kind of a superfluity. We ready? Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out on such a hot evening, and thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. I'm so pleased to see David Ellis again, and I want to talk to him about why aren't there more crime writers or actual, well, maybe just crime writers? Why aren't there more in Chicago?
It's a good question because we have so much fodder in Chicago.
No
You know,
kidding.
people always say, "Where do you come up with your ideas?" And I say, "I live in Chicago. I just open my eyes and look around." Right? There's political corruption. There's violent crime, and you know, in my day job as a judge, I see all the crime in Chicago, and I get the cases, and so there's so much fodder, and I don't know why people don't set more in Chicago because it's literally the perfect place to do it.
Well, I think it's a writers' community is not as robust as it might be in Chicago.
That's probably true. Although, you know, when I go back, Barbara, when I go back like
Yeah.
20 years, I think of like, you know, Gillian Flynn was just getting started, you know, Gone Girl, right? And Marcus Sakey and Blake Crouch, who Blake Crouch has gone on. Now he writes science fiction. He left our crime horror community and went to science fiction, but obviously had a lot of success. But, you know, I look at photos of like all those Chicago writers from like 20 years ago. Pretty good all-star cast.
It was a really good art star. I'm going to try to snag Ian K. Smith to do another
Yeah.
virtual event.
Sure.
He is a really interesting TV personality, a health guy. He's been a
Yeah.
New York Times bestseller writing books that are good for you in terms of your health. And he represents a black voice in Chicago, which I think is a really important thing. Charming guy, but he's a golfer. So I'm going to try. What we actually did is event in Chicago. We actually talked about golf in Arizona. So I know. So I'm thinking that maybe I can persuade him to come into the store and do an actual event when he's out here playing golf.
I'm sure he would do that.
I think he probably
I think
would.
he probably would.
Right. So now, Chicago is an extremely ethnic city in that there are all kinds. I'm going back to when I was a child, okay? So we're talking the 1950s. And if I remember correctly, Chicago was at that time the largest Polish city in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And David's book, in fact, has some names that I'm going to have to ask him to pronounce because they are ethnic names. But Chicago, you know, we tend to think of New York as a melting pot. Boston really, you know, more Irish maybe than anything else. Los
Yes.
Angeles with its various communities, Koreatown, whatever it is. Somewhere or other, I don't understand why Chicago is not getting more attention because
Chicago
it has
is
tons of ethnic neighborhoods.
absolutely a melting pot. And I think even today, Chicago has the second highest population of Polish people in the world with the exception of Warsaw. Yeah. No, the Eastern Europe, I mean, we have so many different neighborhoods in Chicago, and now they're all blurring together. And it's interesting to see them all move around. They all kind of move to different enclaves of Chicago. And the older you get, the more you see them move. And it's a really rich community, and that gives you a lot to write about, you know, because these communities all have their own identities, and they're all really fun people to be around. Like Ukrainian Village in Chicago, I mean, is like one of my favorite places to hang out, you know, and they're still like Russian baths. I mean, it's like crazy. Some of the stuff, the old school stuff from like different ethnicities that goes on. And when you can tap into that kind of stuff, that's really fun, you know, because that's a taste of what's, you know, still really going on in Chicago.
Not only that, it's a beautiful location, and Chicago had a lot of civic-minded people. And, you know, they created Lakeshore Drive and all those beautiful
Yeah.
beachfront communities. At the moment, this is a personal thing for me because I'm actually married to a Rosenwald. There is a movement to have a national monument created for Julius Rosenwald, who was the Sears and Roebuck CEO back at the turn of the 20th century. And he also funded a project called the Rosenwald Schools, which were at the apex of it, there were 5,500 schools across the South that were for black students in black communities. And what he did, which I thought was great for philanthropy, is that he gave them seed money. He didn't just like give them the money. He made them participate and made them, you know, engaged in their schools. Brown versus Board of Education in what was it,
54.
1954,
54.
when it desegregated schools. Unfortunately, desegregated the Rosenwald schools because only black students were admitted. And they kind of fell into abeyance, but the National Trust has now restored I don't know how many of them. And I think it'll be really exciting if the first monument to a Jewish philanthropist, or maybe a Jewish person anywhere, is created in Chicago. I mean, a Jewish person in the United States, let me put it that way.
Maybe we'll get you back up to Chicago, Barbara.
Well, I do go to family reunions because the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago was actually created by Julius Rosenwald based upon the Deutsches Museum in Munich. But he didn't want his name on anything, so he wouldn't let it.
Nowadays, everybody wants their name on things.
I know. It's like branding. I mean, there's some guy in San Diego, I can't think of his name, Conrad Prebys, do I have this right? He also sponsors PBS and all. You can't go anywhere in San Diego without seeing Conrad Prebys. He's at the zoo. He's everywhere. But anyway, do you know that Ravinia was the Rosenwald summer home?
No, I did not know that. I love Ravinia.
He donated Ravinia as well as the Science and Industry Museum.
Ravinia is where you go for summer concerts up in Highland Park. It's wonderful.
I used to go and hear Duke Ellington and Jerry Mulligan.
So the last
I'm
one
really
I went
dating
to.
myself here.
No, totally though. I saw Tony Bennett there.
Did you really?
Yeah, me and my wife and a couple other couples watched Tony Bennett when he was probably 80 years old, and he was wonderful. I mean, he was so much fun. Just a little picnic, and you sit out there, you lie on your picnic.
You could
blankets.
do that at Grant Park too.
You can do it in Grant Park too, right? Grant Park has gotten much better at those kind of concerts. Yeah. It's become another.
So here's the kind of
version
memory
Ravinia.
that you can have when you get to be my age. I remember going with a boy I really was interested in. It was a date to Ravinia to hear a jazz concert. And I was wearing, because girls only wore dresses back then, I was wearing this beautiful pale yellow dress. It was so gorgeous. And at some point while we were sitting there, you couldn't escape mosquitoes in Chicago. One came by, and I smacked it, and it dropped its whole blood load right on my lap.
Oh.
And, there was nothing. I mean, I still, because when you're a teenager, you know that every eye in the whole world is on you, right? And so there I was in this beautiful yellow dress with this big blood blob on it. I almost died of embarrassment.
Okay.
Today I would just laugh, but back then it was a tragic moment.
It was a big moment, I'm sure.
It really was, right? So anyway, David is a judge in Illinois.
Yes.
And therefore he is well qualified to write legal thrillers. Scott Turow is another Chicago Winnetka, actually,
yes, he
guy.
is.
And he too writes great legal thrillers.
He's my hero.
In fact,
he's a
Presumed
good friend, but he's my
Innocent,
hero.
if you really think about it, Presumed Innocent is one of the very earliest unreliable narrator books ever published.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kind of unreliable.
It is unreliable.
Yeah.
I can remember people standing at the checkout counter and actually couldn't figure out who really did it. And they would ask me, how did this work out? Or they would argue with each other.
Yeah.
It was a huge success.
It was amazing. It's
well, no, he's written more than one sequel to that.
He has a book coming out called Presumed Guilty.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
get
he's
out.
also revisited those characters.
Well, he did the one sequel called Innocent.
Presumed Guilty. Okay.
Oh.
Well, right.
Oh, okay.
Well, love it. Right.
He's amazing. Scott is one of the reasons I became a writer. Like when I was first
Well, you
breaking
could hardly escape him if you're in Chicago.
But I was working with him. I had a case with him, and he was already big, right? He'd already written Presumed Innocent, a couple of the other books, Burden of Proof and Pleading Guilty, and he was a huge deal, right? Like way bigger than I ever was. But we had a case together, and I was like breaking in, I'd like written this manuscript, right? And like 5 of my friends had read it, and that was it. And I'm like, I have to call him and ask him like for advice. And I was nervous even to ask him. And he was super nice to me. And he set me up with some people who would take a look at it and give me feedback and all that. But he was so complimentary. He was like, good for you that you did it. Good for you that you wrote the book. Like, most people don't get that far. Like, you saw it all the way through. You should be proud of yourself. And he had no idea if this was line of vision. which ended up winning the Edgar for best first novel. But at the time, it was just some book that was in a 3-ring binder. I mean, this is going back to the 90s, right? Like you're not emailing your book to anybody in the 90s, right? Like I printed it out, front to back pages, and carried a big stack, But he was super nice to me, and I remember calling him, and I'd talked to him 10 or 12 times on the phone because we were co-counsel on a case, representing we were representing a construction company, but that phone call, I was so scared because I had to ask him about book stuff, and he knew that I had something to ask him that had nothing to do with our work, which if you're Scott Turow probably means you wrote a book, right? So I was kind of
probably not jazz or something
right,
like that.
Right. I wasn't calling to ask him about my fastball or something. I was clearly, I'm sure he figured out why I was calling. I was beating around the bush, and he's like, "Anyways, did you want to talk to me about something, Dave?" We kind of shot the shit for 10 minutes, and I'm like, "Yeah, that case we're on, really, that's really something." He's like, "Yeah. Why did you call, Dave? Is there something you want to talk to me about?" "It's no problem. Whatever you want to talk about, it's okay." He could tell I was nervous. I'm like, "Well, Scott, I wrote this book," and he's like, "Oh, good for you." He was, he was so nice. He set me up with a literary agent in Chicago. She didn't accept it, but he's like, she'll read it if I ask her to, and she'll give you the straight scoop. And she did all of those things. She didn't accept the book, but she's like, "Here's what you did well. Here's what you need to fix." He was so great to me, and I've kept in touch with him, and I think he's the best writer out there. I love Scott. I didn't know he's got a book called Pleading Guilty coming out, or Presumed Guilty.
All right.
Okay. Well, whatever it is.
Atta girl, Merle, source of books to come.
So he's one of the main reasons I became a writer.
I would have known this, but here's how this works in the book world. The publishers, this is July, right? So I have spent the last 4 days filling out event grids, which are requests to host authors that run from February through the end of May. I have a list now of when authors that you like and that we like are going to be, in theory, coming to see us all the way through May. It's July. Do I care? But I still have to do this, okay? The only publisher so far that hasn't sent me their grid, because they're in the midst of considerable reorganization, is Scott's publisher. So that's David Baldacci, that's Scott, that's a whole bunch of authors that I still have to put onto my map. And that's why I didn't know about Scott.
I'm excited for that
should
next
know
book,
that.
though, yeah.
No, me too.
Okay.
We actually take pre-orders. Amazingly enough, we do that. Right. So I'm going to add that when I go home tonight. I'm going to look up Presumed Guilty and add it to our list. Does it? Right.
Yeah,
I mean, publishing is turning into the fashion industry. You know how it is. So you really want a bathing suit in June? Forget it, because they're actually onto fur. And, stuff for the next season. And publishing is, think about this. How do I know who we want to see next May? How do I know? If you really think about it. I only know recognizable names.
I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. I just try to write the best book I can and
this
go where they
your
tell
side.
me.
This is not your side, but I'm just pointing out that it's exciting.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you were in Chicago, wouldn't you rather be here in January?
Yes, in January I'd rather be
So
here.
maybe you could come back and talk to Scott with me. We'll talk about that.
I would love to. I've interviewed him before for one of his books, and I would love to do it.
Okay. This is also how it works,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Now you roped me in, right?
I know.
I will absolutely come here. I don't know if he'd want me to, but I would absolutely come here and
I'm
interview
not
Scott.
actually going to ask him.
Just say, Dave Ellis is going to do it. Right.
No.
That's a gift. Well, if
Certainly
I have
better
to, if
than
I
July
must.
at 100 and whatever it is at the moment. I know.
Yeah,
David came out of the Valley Ho after we'd had our alcohol and other things. He was just stunned. He looked like the bull just before the matador gets him, and he said, "God, it's hot."
Yeah, it's
it really
hot.
is.
Like 107 degrees. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Oh, come on. It was 119 not long, or 17.
Was it?
A week or so ago.
That's.
Is that? I think.
So you have a New York accent.
She
Okay.
does.
I like
right.
it.
Right.
Yeah, I love
So
Brooklyn
at the
accents.
moment, if it's under 110, is actually doable.
It's manageable.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
I don't get you
Our
guys, but
standards.
that's cool. That's cool.
Last summer, I didn't figure out. We're really digressing, virtual audience. Sorry, and I'll stop here in a minute. Last summer, it didn't occur to me to water my saguaro until I drove around and I saw that saguaros in distress were dropping their giant limbs. And I came home and I thought it's never occurred to me to water our cactus, but I see. So every third day now, I trudge out with my little
You water
watering
your
can,
cactus?
and I water my saguaro, and it's doing okay because I learned my lesson last summer.
Okay.
There we are. So let's talk about, having digressed totally, let's
That's
talk
okay.
about first lies. And one of the things you might want to do is pronounce the name of some of the characters because we've talked about the ethnic quality.
Well, I mean, most of the characters are pretty basic.
So
like-
is it Balanoff? Is it Balanoff?
oh, okay.
How do we do it?
So the main character is Leo Balanoff.
Okay.
Leo is our main protagonist. He is an attorney who's also a pathological liar.
Is that a first for you?
That's a first for me. That was a huge thing for me. Like, if there's one thing I have learned as a writer, it took me, Barbara, it took me years to figure this out. It took my wife to tell me this, but I'm at my best when I create the character first. You know that old question, what's more important, plot or character? I used to say that was a false question because they're both important. I don't say that anymore. Character is the most important thing, I think. I think you start with a character who's really interesting, that you want to spend time with, and build the plot around that, and that is the best way to write a book. And that is the most important thing. If you don't care about the writer, the character, and you may not like the character, you know, you may respect them but not like them. You might like them but not respect them. But in some way, you want to spend time with that person. That's the most important thing. And if you have a uninteresting character but a cool plot, everything just kind of goes down a notch. So I said, what would be a cool thing? Like after I wrote Look Closer, I said, what's next for me? Like, what could I do? And I thought, I just came up with this idea of what about a protagonist, a first-person protagonist who's a pathological liar? And my heart just started pounding. I'm like, oh my God, I could do so much stuff with that. I've never seen that. I've never read that before. I've read a lot of mysteries in my time, and I've never seen that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. And then I thought, what kind of a jam can I get this guy in, right? So I created a lawyer. He's a lawyer. He's a pathological liar and a lawyer. So insert
Some people would
lawyer
think that was
joke.
a qualification.
Absolutely. Insert your lawyer joke here. But I thought, what can I do with this pathological liar attorney? And he's kind of a crusader who really cares about righting a wrong, right? Fixing an injustice. And to the point where he will make great personal sacrifices, right? He'll go to great lengths to right wrongs. And as the book begins, that's exactly where our pathological liar finds himself. He has tried to right a wrong. He finds himself accused of murder of a very, very bad person. And the FBI says, we've got you, and the only way we'll let you off the hook is if you cooperate in an undercover FBI investigation. So I've got a pathological liar in the middle of an undercover FBI investigation, and I thought, just there's so many ideas that spawn off that I almost don't even know where to start. So it was more like thinking of things not to write than to write once I came up with that premise.
So he's not only a pathological liar, but he's risk addicted. He
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
And in point of fact, we could say that really good trial lawyers are risk addicted.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think so. I mean, you know, in my
They live on the high
in
wire,
my day,
yeah.
I was one of those.
You
and,
were once a
you know,
trial lawyer
although-
yourself?
Yep, in an informal basis. The very first case that I ever tried was in federal court in Abingdon, Virginia, and I had to qualify 15 FBI expert witnesses in a bank robbery trial, and I'd never done it before. I was really terrified. But, you
That's
know,
pretty
if,
impressive,
if
Barbara.
you... Well, actually, you'll be happy to know the state won the case.
Well, that's
I did not
even better.
completely screw them. But there is, you really have to love that. You have to love the risk of actually doing that and it's on a stage where there are people watching you. You
Yeah.
know, you're not cloistered and whatever. All great trial lawyers, and I might have been one, except for detours along the way, really are risk addicted, I think.
Yeah. And they all call themselves storytellers, too.
They do.
Trial lawyers will bore me to death by saying, I'm a storyteller. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, but you know what?
Congratulations.
Here's the thing. The best story often wins, even
Well, no
overcoming
doubt.
the facts, because
Oh, yeah.
juries are more responsive to stories than they are many times to actual facts.
Yeah, and I think that's because people have been ingrained since birth to be told information through stories. I mean, our parents and grandparents told us stories when we were kids. We read stories that we were told them. TV shows are stories. And so we like that. And now we're watching all this crime stuff. We're watching CSI and all this stuff. Or some, Suits. No, what is it?
Or
Yeah,
actual
Suits.
politics, where many of us are creating stories about how we'd like them to come out.
Well, that's true. That's true. But yeah, no, we're very much ingrained for that. So yeah, trial lawyers are good storytellers. That was one of the reasons I was drawn to the law. It's not where I ended up. I didn't end up being a trial lawyer. Now I'm obviously a judge, but
You're one of the few judges that actually will write crime novels. I go back.
am I?
Cyril Hare was my all-time favorite judge writing. And
Before you met me, you mean?
Yes.
Because now I'm your favorite. Okay.
Tonight you're definitely my favorite. No
Okay.
question about it.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Right.
I'll take
and
that.
I'm trying to I'm having a momentary blank because of my age on the name of his book. And it actually has an unreliable narrator.
Okay.
It's written in the 1930s. He is a judge in the days when judges still sat on wool sacks if you were British. And in the book and in real life, judges were still preceded as they rode the circuit, because it was a circuit. That's why they're called circuit court judges still, preceded by trumpeters. Isn't that cool?
That's hilarious.
Right. So Cyril Hare, Cyril. But the reason I bring that up is that because he was a judge, he couldn't write, or felt he couldn't write under his own name. His real name was, I can't remember what.
Oh.
And there are only like a handful of judges over time that have written crime novels.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was writing books long before I became a judge, so I figured I kind of could grandfather that in.
Yeah, that's true. You wrote them when you were a lawyer, and then you
I've
became.
been writing them.
Then you became a judge.
Yeah.
Eschewing Illinois politics on the way, right? Although in Illinois you have to elect judges, don't you?
Yeah, I
Just
haven't
like here?
issued politics really. I worked in the legislature. I've seen a lot of really interesting stuff in Chicago, and I've been around some of it.
So you've pointed out that the reason that our guy is suspected of murder is based on physical evidence, right?
Oh yeah, his fingerprints are on the murder weapon.
So your challenge in this is to overcome, if you can,
Yes.
physical evidence in some credible way.
Yeah.
Because we're going to assume that our guy didn't actually do this, or if he did, he's going to figure out some way around it.
Well, I'm not
gonna
sure
give
why we should
anything
assume
away.
that, Barbara.
No?
Well, I wouldn't assume anything in these books. With these books, I try to turn as many tropes on their heads as I can. Okay. And the thing is that the readers, you guys are the readers, you're smart people, right? Like you're gonna figure you're gonna know from the moment the book begins. We're in a little bit of a game together, right? I'm trying to tell you an interesting story, but I'm trying to surprise you. You know that. So you're taking in all the information, but you're also trying to think ahead and trying to predict. And it's pretty fun. And sometimes you can think, I know you all think I'm going this way, so I'm going to go that way, even if it's the more expected way, because you're expecting me not to do it. You know what I mean? Like you can play this game all day, and it's kind of fun to game out as you're writing, because in some ways it really is just a game. I mean, I'm not curing cancer with these books, right? Like, this is supposed to be fun. Like, I made it ever since I started writing my own books again, which really was this is just my second book since I made that. I came back to my own solo books. Like, ever since then, like during COVID, I said, I'm going to start writing my books again, and they're going to be fun. There's enough serious shit in the world right now, right? People are so worried about so many things. This book is going to be fun. Look Closer was fun. This book is going to be fun. And I know we're playing a game. And I want you to be like, this is awesome. This is really fun. I thought he was going this way. He went that way on page 70. And now on page 120, he switched it up on me again. Another way I didn't see. Like, that's fun. That's how we watch TV shows, right? Like, I always think of, like, if you're watching like a show, like you're streaming something on Netflix, right? It's a 7 or 8 episode, 1 season show. At the end of every episode, there's a little cliffhanger, plot twist, right? And you're like, oh, this is awesome. I'm gonna go to the next one right away. Like, to me, that's every 10 chapters of my book. Without realizing it, I'm writing those books that way. I'm writing them so every maybe, I don't know, 10, 12,000 words, hopefully I'm shifting the earth on you in a way you didn't expect. And hopefully you're enjoying it and saying, wow, this is getting harder to figure out. I thought it was going here, it was going there. You know, there's an element of fun that you can't forget about, because you want to do a lot of things with a book, and you want to have your artistic integrity and write these deep characters, but I also just want the reader to be like, I am totally enjoying this. You forget that sometimes, and writers sometimes take themselves so seriously. They're like, oh, I'm doing all these important things. Okay, fine. You can draw some important themes from this book if you want to.
Yep,
but I also just want you to be like, damn, this was fun. This was a really fun book.
Well, and one of the reasons it's fun is that you set up so many obstacles for him.
Yeah.
The question is,
Yeah.
can he possibly overcome them in order to get to? Because, ultimately, if he's the hero in the book, we want him to survive at least till the end of the book. And see where it goes.
Yeah.
You didn't design this, or did you? Let me not assume anything. Did you design this as the start of a series, or did you
No.
design this to be one and done?
No, I don't.
You don't.
So I briefly wrote a series because my publisher basically put a gun to my head. They really wanted me to write a series, and I wrote a book called The Hidden Man, which was like my 5th standalone, about a character named Jason Coleridge, and I really liked him, and they're like, how about him? Could he be a series character? I'm like, yeah, actually, I think he could. Usually I crash and burn my characters, and so I'm like, there's nothing left of them. And so I did a series, about 4 books, and they did fine, but actually that's when that's when I stopped writing my own books, was in
When you
2014.
say that, what did you start? I know the answer to this, but for those who
Yeah.
don't, who did you start writing with?
Well, I had already been writing with Patterson. So I've been writing with James Patterson since 2009. Since 2009. And I was trying to have this really busy job and also write my own books and write books with James Patterson. And that was really hard to do, but I was doing it. I wasn't sleeping very much. And that's why I have bags under my eyes and gray hair. But I was managing to do it, but in the year 2014, right when I became a judge, I got into I was writing this series. You were asking me about a series, the Jason Coleridge series. I'd written 4 of them, and my publisher wanted me to go to a place I didn't want to go, and I was like, well, it's kind of hard to say no to a publisher, because they're publishing your books, they're paying you money, right? And it was very respectful. Nobody yelled at anybody, but I said, I just don't want to go there. And at that moment in 2014, I had just become a judge, and I was writing books with Jim Patterson. So I said, I think I'm just going to take a break. I think I'm just going to walk away from a 2-book deal with my publisher, which I guess was really unheard of, but I just did it. And very respectful, but I said, no thanks. I'm just going to see how my life goes for a while. And my life went fine for a while, right? Because I loved being a judge. I loved writing with Patterson. The guys taught me more about writing than I ever.
That was what I was trying to get to.
Yeah,
was because everyone I have ever talked to, and there are a lot of them because Jim Patterson writes with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Every single one of them has said how much they learned in the experience of writing. I
he's
think
terrific.
Sometimes,
He's terrific.
Yeah. That, for just craft lessons, you could go to the Iowa, school for or whatever, or you could write with Jim, should he happen to ask you.
I would. Yeah, I'm sure the Iowa writing
and Jim is
school
much
is supposed
more
to be really
pragmatic.
good. Oh my gosh, yeah.
But everyone I've ever talked to who's written with him has said how much they learned from that.
Oh yeah,
experience.
it's like a master class. I mean, when you talk to Jim, he's. So I've been doing this with him for. It's got to be 15 years now. I think we've written about 12 books together. And he will still, he called me today. I was sitting in the airport waiting for the plane to Scottsdale, and he called me. I was trying to order breakfast at the airport, and I'm like, do I take this phone call from Jim Patterson or do I order my breakfast? And I actually managed
your
to.
priorities
No,
right.
I did both. Yeah, no, he was talking, and I paused it, and I ordered my breakfast, and then put it back. And I go, go ahead, Jim. But he's every time I talk to him, it's like a masterclass. Like you'd think I knew everything there is to know about writing. I've written 20 some books. I've written like 12 with him. I've written with him for so long. You'd think I know what he wants, but I still don't. I still don't always. And he'll tell me. He's very nice, right? He never yelled at me, never raised his voice to me. Super nice guy. But he'll just say, like, he'll always start with something very complimentary. He'll say, like, well, this was very good writing, Dave. And that means, but there's something I didn't like.
But, right?
Yeah, right. I'm the but. And the but is usually, this is a little too much, or this was a little too slow. We need to, pick up the pace here, whatever it is. And he'll explain, and sometimes he'll just say something, and it's such a nugget. And sometimes I won't even know what he means when he says it. But he'll be telling me to rewrite some pages with a few things in mind, and I'll like scribble it down. Like he said this phrase, I don't even know what it means. And then I'll start rewriting it, and I'll be like, oh, I know what he meant. Hey, damn it, he's totally right. Like he just knows. Jim is very focused. He always says we're not trying to win book awards. We're not trying to, get Pulitzers. We're not trying to, be so self-congratulatory about how good our own prose is. It's all about the reader. They want a good story. Give them a good story. And he's very specific about every chapter and what he wants in each chapter and the length, 1,200 words. 1,200 words is the rule, right? No more than 1,200 words in a chapter, with a few exceptions. A couple books I did, we had exceptions. But other than those couple, the one I did with Clinton and the one I'm doing with him now, which is a unique book, all the basic ones we do together, 1,200 words or less. And so that's like 3.5 pages. And he makes you pack a punch in every chapter. He doesn't let you drone on, He's like, we don't need 3 paragraphs on the color of the couch. Nobody gives a shit what the color, like a sentence would be fine, or half of a sentence, a phrase. It's the color of chocolate. Okay, I know what chocolate looks like.
Oh, look, you reupholstered it.
Right, whatever. But you know what? Like you can just say something like that, and like, okay, like he's like, put us in this scene, a couple sentences, yeah, sure, but don't drone. Nobody who reads my books, who buys my books, meaning being Jim Patterson, wants that. I've made a deal with them. It's going to be fast and fun, and so, it's all about this is what the reader wants, and I've really adopted that now. Like now, when I write a chapter of this book or look closer, I'm always like, is this chapter enjoyable for some reason? Is it really scary? Is it really thrilling? Is it funny? Is it heartbreaking? Whatever it is, something. Is there something impactful about each chapter? And if there isn't, either get rid of it or fix it. Like no wasted chapters, just make everything count. And it's like watching a really good movie, right? Like if you watch your favorite movie of all time, pick your favorite movies, right? Whether they've won Academy Awards or there's your own deep, dark secret movies, right, that you really love. You probably like every scene in it, right? Right? Like you'll be flipping through HBO and you'll be like, oh, that's the middle of a movie I really love. You turn on. It doesn't matter what scene it's on because you love them all. That's what he wants. That's what he wants in every book.
So interesting because legal writing doesn't work that way. I have now remembered the name of the Cyril Hare book. I am proving to you that it isn't that your memory fails, it's the retrieval system is whirring along there trying to get to it. It's called A Tragedy at Law. And I cannot recommend it highly enough. If you enjoy British mystery, if you like legal thrillers, if you like historical fiction, and it has a fabulous twist at the end with an unreliable narrative.
I will read it.
I mean, seriously, it is really an amazing book. But as I say, written under a pseudonym as a judge. Anatomy of a Murder is another. Robert Travers was another judge who actually wrote. And then there was.
I saw the movie. I love the movie.
I remembered this too. William Coughlin, Coughlin, is the other judge. I can remember. He was a judge in Michigan.
Okay.
And those are the guys, besides you, as judges who have written legal thrillers. Yeah. And so I've often wondered if it's just judges can't stand to be overruled. Is that true? And therefore, they don't really want to write. Don't answer that. It was a rhetorical question. Okay. But seriously, I do think there are lots of lawyers There was years ago. I can't even remember. Once again, I can't think of her name. Maybe Liza. Anyway, she said that in order to inspire her to keep writing, she put a sign over her desk in her law office that said "Publish or Practice." It was a choice, and she wrote a lot of really good legal thrillers, but she wanted, to inspire herself to keep writing more than to actually practice.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, but also
I've managed to do both. It's not easy, but I love them both. So I just make sacrifices so I can do. I sacrifice sleep.
All right,
That's
so
basically what I do.
let's wander back to the book, which I
Okay.
keep digressing from, but that's what I usually
That's
do.
okay.
So we have our guy, and he is. Notice how I avoid trying to pronounce his name.
Leo Balanoff.
Thank you.
we go.
And he is a pathological liar, and he is suspected of a murder, and the physical evidence is against him.
It's quite damning, and that's all in chapter 1. I'm not spoiling
Right.
anything. Yeah.
And then he's offered a deal,
Mhm.
i.e., maybe they won't try to convict him if they help him take down. And I have to say that your bad guy in this book is truly horrendous. Do you actually know anybody, or have you had anybody like that in front of you? Because he is a beast.
Well, I see a lot of bad stuff in Chicago. I see a lot of bad crime in Chicago. Stuff that you wouldn't want to write about. Like even in this book, like some of the things that this
You
guy does.
softened him up?
No, I didn't soften. No, I didn't soften him up. I just didn't talk about it. Like this guy is a guy who engages in things like human trafficking. But I don't show that in the book because I didn't think I needed to.
No, it's
frankly.
off-stage stuff.
Yeah,
but
it's
just
offstage.
terrifying to
Oh
to
yeah, he's
think
a terrible
about him.
human being. And I had a scene where he did some really terrible stuff, and my agent said, if there's one scene I would take out of the book, it's that scene. He's like, we get it, and I thought hard about it. I'm like, okay, I'll take it out.
Right. So this is not a cozy, but there isn't really
It's not
violence
a cozy at
and
all.
disemboweling and
Oh, no,
all
no,
that
no,
stuff.
no.
Not in the book. Whatever bad things happen, it really is off stage.
But
so
the
you won't be
interesting
horrified.
thing is when I wrote Look Closer, that's set in like a suburb of Chicago, and it's a husband-wife adultery, affair, love triangle, maybe a love rectangle actually, but whatever it is. It's really more of a rectangle,
Love
isn't it?
More geometry.
Well, whatever but it was like what they called domestic suspense, and everyone said, okay, this is a domestic suspense novel, and it's done very well. And so Putnam Random House said, hey, okay, how about another domestic suspense? This isn't quite domestic suspense, right? Like it's an undercover FBI investigation of really bad people in Chicago, so it's not domestic in that way. But I never, one of the reasons I got into trouble with my publisher back in 2014 was I didn't necessarily want to go into the pigeonhole they tried to put me. They're like, you're a legal thriller writer. I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. I know I'm a judge and I'm a lawyer, but I actually like psychological thrillers, not legal thrillers. There's nothing wrong with legal thrillers. And if the book works to have like a big courtroom Perry Mason moment, I can definitely do that. I'm pretty good at that. But that's not what moves me. What moves me is people trying to outsmart each other, right? And me outsmarting the reader or trying to, and you guys trying to figure it out. Like that whole cat and mouse game, I just really love. And so this time it was an FBI investigation. The first time it was domestic. My next book is going to be domestic. I'm trying to play ball with my publisher, but I'm just looking for the scenario that will be best to play this little cat and mouse game for the reader's enjoyment. So yeah, it's not your domestic suspense thriller, but it's definitely a psychological thriller.
So Lawyer Balanoff, actually, there's, not surprisingly, there's, a love story interest. There is personal stakes. So it's not just about taking down the super bad guy.
Oh, gosh, no.
So he also, it's so often true that guys who get themselves into, excuse me, what's the word I want? Who get themselves ensnared in places where they commit crimes or kill people or whatever it is they might do. There's usually going to be some victim or potential victim connected with them. Some people connected with them may end up paying the consequences for the choices that they are making.
Oh my gosh!
So Tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about
no.
about that.
Yeah, no, I definitely try to do that in the book. I mean, I try to leave nobody completely untarnished because they rarely are, and I meld. You know, one of the things I like to do, and one of the reasons I don't write a series, is that I my characters usually their background, their backstory is part of the plot. And so when I create this character, like when I created Leo, I created an extremely messed up backstory. His personal history is very messed up, but it informs the plot. And so yeah, everybody ends up getting a little hit in this. There's no like clear-cut winner or loser because I don't think that's normally how it works. I think when bad stuff happens, a lot of people are affected, and I try to avoid too much of a happy ending, unless it really makes sense, you know, but because there really aren't that many happy endings in life. I mean, usually when things like this happen, everybody's a little bit scarred. And I sort of like it when everyone's a little battle scarred at the end of it, including my protagonist, who's usually quite scarred. Not to give anything away.
Who is the woman in this book? I mean, one of the key women, if not the woman.
So Andrea, her name is Andi, but she's Andrea. She is his former girlfriend who was a police officer, and now she becomes the head of security for a pharmaceutical company. And there's a issue of corporate espionage in the book, which was fun to learn all about corporate espionage.
Pharmaceutical companies are like a hunting ground, you know, for corporate espionage.
Of course they are, because they have all these secrets.
Not just corporate espionage, but international espionage, if you really think about it. There's so much money in drugs.
Yeah, it's mostly China, but the funny thing I learned about corporate espionage, so I have a friend who's a lawyer at one of these companies, and he said, you'd be shocked because you have these really, really smart people, right? These like scientists learning all this stuff about medicine and making all these advances. And he said, what you would like to do if you're the company is to hermetically seal them, right? And so you can't bring your phones in, you can't talk to anybody. He said, but the truth is these people, first of all, you don't want to run them out of the company. You need them. And they aren't those type of people. They are, by definition, by character, collaborative. They want to talk about it to everybody. Like, oh, I've got this idea. It's really cool. I found these nanoparticles that will cure, you know, that will invade the whatever. All they want to do is sit there and talk with all their buddies in science about it. Meanwhile, the company's like, don't say anything, don't say anything. And there's this delicate balance. And the theme that I learned from a lot of people is you'd be amazed at how not secure some of these really cutting edge technologies are.
Right. And you know, if you watch Oppenheimer, do you remember, if you watched it, that Einstein and several of the people in Oppenheimer, they really wanted to share the whole thing with nuclear fission and the science. It was hard. I think it was Einstein in particular, you know, was really a sharer, an internationalist, so to speak. And yet, you know, everybody else is going, no, we have to, you know, they'll blow us to bits. So we have to, you know, and then it was hard after the war for a lot of people to accept the idea that some of the foremost German scientists were actually, like Werner von Braun and all, brought to this country. You know, it was like just washed away their whole Nazi history in order to further.
Of course.
So, you know, it's not surprising that in the pharmaceutical industry there would be that impulse towards sharing everything, but at the same time the counter impulse would be no, you know, it's proprietary. We don't want anybody, because there's so much money involved most of the time.
Yeah, and it's so funny whenever you research a topic that you don't know very well, you're always surprised at how much just human nature comes into it, and like human error comes in. Like, I have friends who are in the CIA, and they're like, you know, if you think of the CIA in a movie, you think of like a Mission Impossible Tom Cruise guy doing everything right. The truth is that's a bureaucracy with lazy people and dumb people who do stupid things and make stupid mistakes. And like, oh, I forgot to, you know, do that. And now this secret got out, you know. I mean, that stuff happens, right? We're just human. And that was my big revelation with the pharmaceutical industry. I said, oh, it's probably like really like buttoned down. And he's like, not as much as you would think, because people don't want to be buttoned down, and they'll quit the company if they have to be. And so you have this balance. I thought, oh, it's really, I thought I wanted to talk about that just a tiny bit in the book. Like, that's not what the book is about, but it's one of the criminal things going on in the book is corporate espionage. So it's fun when you can find little things like that.
There's a lot in this book. I mean, you
Yeah.
really have to pay attention. It's a lot of fun, but at the same time, there's so many balls in the air. You can't just like skim through it.
Yeah,
And
it's
you
not
can learn a
casual
lot
reading.
too. I love books where I actually get to learn stuff, like for example about the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah,
I
do
kept
too.
waiting for the IRS to show up, Al Capone. I mean, in the end, it wasn't the Chicago cops and it wasn't the FBI that got him. It was and you know what's really come to light recently? I've talked to 2 or 3 authors. I didn't realize that the U.S. Treasury agents are actually the guys at the moment. They can go and do stuff that never even occurred to me.
Yeah,
that they were out
authority.
there, behaving better than the CIA in lots of respects.
That's probably
more
true.
aggressively, anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean they the Secret Service is under Treasury, and so they do all kinds of
You have to
stuff.
ask yourself, why is the Secret Service under Treasury?
Yeah, I'm not really
I
sure
find
why.
that really interesting. You would not think that was the natural structure.
It wasn't my idea. That's all I can
No,
say.
I know it wasn't. And you just knew that the woman, the head of it, her head was going to roll, because whenever anything goes wrong, somebody has to be held accountable, right? Usually the person at the top.
Right.
So, whatever. She may not have had anything to
probably has no culpability at all. But
that's right.
you
But there's this sort of lust for doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So did you also, talking about the pharmaceutical industry, have all of you noticed that there's a whole discovery thing about the managers at the local levels have been actually jacking up prices to make more money at your local CVS for your local CVS? It's been a big thing in the news recently.
It's not surprising
is that
to me at all.
drug prices are so manipulated, not by the actual development, that the big up pharmaceutical company, but by the local pharmacy managers at Walgreens and CVS,
doesn't
who can
surprise
make
me
more
either.
money for their local
There's
branches.
money to be made.
Yep, by upping the prices. I mean,
Maybe we should write about that next.
there's a whole trickle down thing,
maybe
right?
someone
Well,
will
it's
get
not
murdered doing
exciting
all this.
enough. Come on, it's not. But if you really, the trickle down effect is amazing when there's money like that
Sure.
washing around.
Well, money is always a big motive. I mean, I'm always looking for some idea, some
There
reason
is.
why somebody would want to kill somebody.
Right. So, is there anything else you'd like to say about the book before we take questions?
No, I mean, I definitely want to leave time for questions. I mean, I think it was a really fun book to write. It was hard to write. It was hard to write a book after Look Closer, because I really was really happy with Look Closer, and it's gotten a good response. And I was a little paralyzed writing a follow-up. It's not a sequel, but
book.
my next book, because I really felt like Look Closer was really what I wanted to do. And it took me a couple years to write this, and I was nervous about it because I wasn't sure I could top Look Closer, and I don't know if it tops it or not. But it's a really fun book, and it's one of the craziest characters I've written. And I think if you figure out the ending, send me an email, and I will I'll buy you something, because I don't think you'll figure it out.
I don't think saying topping it is actually the right way
No.
to look at this.
Equaling it though. Like you feel like like Look Closer, I thought was a home run for me. Like I think I hadn't written my own book for like 6-7 years, and it was during COVID, and I'm like, I had all these ideas in my head, and my wife's like, you have to write your own books again. That's what you want to do. And it was COVID. Like, we're sitting home all the time. So I'm like, okay. She's like, you're out of excuses. Write your own book. And she was right, and I did. And I felt like I had this 7 years of ammunition, and I emptied the entire round. Like, I put everything into that book, and I'm like, well, and I was really happy with it. And I think people have responded that way, right? And then it's like, okay, well, now what? Like, I have nothing. I have an empty gun now. Like, what do I do now? And it was a bit of a freak out. Like, am I just a one-hit wonder? And then I was like, no, I've got a lot, and I just need to go back to first principles. Like, what and again, my wife in my head, right? Like, create a character that you really want to spend time with. And Leo, I really wanted to spend time with. I love Leo, maybe my favorite character of all time. So start writing this quirky character, figure out his background, and then it starts flowing, and suddenly you got a story. And I'm like, That's the ticket for me. It's not to compare yourself to another book or to try to, certainly not to try to write the same thing again, because I will just, that is just not me. I will never write the same thing twice. It's just,
Don't you think
you know.
it's the nature of creativity that some things are going to be more, I don't know what the right, I don't want to say successful because that can't be the right word, but some things are going to
Yeah.
resonate more than others. Not every
Sure.
Picasso is a great Picasso.
Right, and it's also subjective. Like, you know,
Exactly.
I've seen people online say that this book was better than Look Closer. Okay, I'm glad you think that, you know. And the people who don't, I'm not even sad that they don't
Yeah.
think that.
But you also
you
have
know.
to remember that, this is 2 years later.
Yeah.
And a book that resonates. I mean, think about that. People are always saying to me, how did something like The Da Vinci Clone or The Firm turn into a phenomenal bestseller? Or The Firm.
Sure.
And here's my answer. The Firm was written the first year, if you go back and think about it, that success, because actually I think his first book, which was not The Firm, but what
A
was it
Time to
called?
Kill.
Time to Kill. The Firm came out the first year that lawyers were allowed to advertise, and therefore people were receptive to the idea of a crooked law firm. The Da Vinci Code came along when the Pope was dying and when all the revelations about abuse of children and so forth in the church were coming to light, and people were therefore willing to think bad things about the Catholic Church that might not have worked 3 or 4 years later. So you have to think about some books just hit at a moment in which society and the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it, is receptive to it. And you can't write for that because books take a long time to write and a long time to get published. So it's really amazing luck when a book manages to publish at the moment.
Yeah, the perfect storm.
When all of this occur. Exactly.
Yeah,
And, you can't target it. So to say that, the Da Vinci Clone was, there were Da Vinci clones forever afterward. Religious conspiracy thrillers were like the only thing that published for 4 or 5 years after the Da Vinci. And publishing is like that. If you have noticed that right now,
for sure.
everything is about romantasy. Everything is about fantasy, and they're code words. If they say it's a sapphic story, that means it's lesbian, but they don't want to say that. I mean, because it's a better word in terms of that. If they say it's spicy, that means that there's lots more sex in it than you might expect.
I don't
they
know
have
any of this,
code
but
words, that they
I'm
use for
in.
this. I mean, it's like a new vocabulary. It really is.
Yeah.
The New York Times wrote a whole article about romantasy, and the revelation that really got me was the woman who has a romance bookstore in Georgia who sends out a monthly subscription box and includes a vibrator. And I thought that's just a step too far for me.
All right.
I'm serious, you know.
Right.
And,
You got my attention now, Barbara.
just say, I'll give you the store so you can go sign up for the monthly subscription,
I'm
and your guy Jim Patterson and I, when I did his January book debut, because usually once a year I get to launch a Patterson on Zoom, and this whole subject came up, and he said to me, it'll be like every other publishing trend. You'll get too many books, and too many of them will not be good books, and everybody will get tired of them. But for the moment, this is what they're publishing. And, it really is true. So the people that truly luck, like Gillian, whom you mentioned, Gone Girl struck at a moment when the Da Vinci clones and Twilight and all of the Twilight clones had died away, and people were ready for, like, the next new thing. And she happened to write that book.
It was also awesome.
I'm not saying it wasn't awesome, but I'm also saying it came along at a moment when everybody wanted the next big thing, and that was it. She could not have predicted that.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that.
Right. So all you can do is write the best book you can, and you'll either strike the zeitgeist or you won't.
Yeah. Well, let's hope I keep striking the zeitgeist.
I love that word. Does anyone actually
know
what it means in German?
But I want to strike it because
Zeitgeist. Look it up. Come on, Merle. You have the fastest phone I know. Look up. It's a German word that I think just kind of means, whatever sort of cultural thing is
totally
hot at the moment. Right. Okay. Questions. Who would like to ask a question? Oh, the gentleman in the back.
Mr. Ellis, I noticed that you like to talk about crime in Chicago, and maybe base some of your books off of that. Have you ever given consideration to writing a book about crime in this cute little town called Downers Grove?
Can I vote for Winnetka, where I grew up
We
instead?
could do Winnetka. So we have several Downers Grove people here. So
Represent
so
Winnetka and
I-
Evanston.
Yes. So I grew up in Downers Grove. By the way, your reference to that person in the back as a gentleman is probably stretching it a bit. I know him quite well. Gentleman might be a little much, but no, it's
He's
my
a
friend Dave.
gentleman, and I can say that because when his SUV was coming in, SUV, that you were the white SUV guy, he's driving in from Goldwater as I'm driving this way, and he was kind enough to stop and let me make a turn.
You did, yeah. Thank
he
you,
was
John.
a real gentleman, so I thank
Yeah,
you for
that
that.
was John.
Left turn accidents are the most prevalent accidents in Phoenix. I can tell you that hands down.
So I have not said a book in Downers Grove, but I did basically look closer in the town I live in now, which is just outside of Chicago. I don't usually say where I live just because of my other job.
Privacy concerns.
Well, security, really. Like I have to. I've been told never to tell people where I live. People can kind of figure it out if they look closer, and they know the Chicago area. They can probably figure out where I live. But it's in the western suburbs, so close enough to Downers Grove, just not quite Downers Grove. But I really liked writing I like writing like crime set in the suburbs because it's such a different thing. Like you spend so much time watching shows and reading books about like Manhattan, Chicago, LA. But the local crimes are super interesting, and the way they're investigated, and you have very different police forces. Like the town I live in is 11,000 people, and it's a fairly well-to-do, like not everybody in there is rich, but we have lots of rich people in my town. I'm not one of them, but there's plenty of them. And the police are like really nice to us. Like they're not like the cops you might see on a TV show, like some big showdown, you pull them over and there's a shootout. Like these are people that do not want to offend the people who live in the town, which is not the dynamic you normally think. Now picture a murder in that town. And they're like, what do we do now? And it's like the first time anyone's ever been murdered in this town. Like my town, I think, I don't think it's ever had a murder. So if there was a murder, they'd be like, what do we do? You know, and all the local residents would be clutching their pearls, right? Like, oh my God, a murder. You better solve this right now. And they're like, well, we don't want to question anybody because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Like there's this weird dynamic, maybe not, that's a little extreme, but you've got this whole dynamic of these towns, these small towns, these murders that when I started exploring it, I thought was super interesting. It's just a whole different thing, and it's kind of the opposite of the stereotypes. And I think that when you see something like that, it brings a realism to it that you're like, yeah, that's probably what would happen in my town.
We have one here called Gilbert, right? Similar.
I don't not know
Smaller
Gilbert.
town. No,
Is
you
it a small
don't. I
town?
won't
Okay.
even talk to you about the Gilbert Goons. But nonetheless, you have to ask yourself, if you live here, why do they keep getting a pass? And the answer is sort of what you just were talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah, the
Yeah,
police didn't want to, get into it.
Yeah,
I
with
know.
the locals. Yeah.
Yep, amazing. Right. So, another question. No? Yes.
My brother-in-law wants to know how you feel about the Clash.
How I feel about the Clash? It's one of my favorite bands of all time. But you know that already, don't you? I'm totally showing my age, of course. The Clash was like a punk rock band in like the 70s, but that's when I was growing up, and I liked punk rock.
And her brother-in-law would be my brother.
You-
I'm Tim Criswell.
oh, you're Tim? Oh my God! Oh my God!
It's great. You have a hometown sort of,
The last time I saw
Todd
Tim,
here.
I know his brother Todd pretty well, but although I've lost touch with him. Oh my God, that's what happens when you come to Arizona. Like all these people who like have wizened up and moving here.
you see a lot more of them in January.
Yeah, right.
Right. There's a
Oh,
whole
you even
Chicago
look like Todd.
contingent
You
that is
totally
here
look
in
like Todd.
January. For
The
sure.
last time I saw you, I'll bet you were like in 7th grade. Yeah, at most. You're probably more like 4th grade. Yeah.
Yeah. No. it
How'd you
does.
like Chicago a few weeks ago? Okay. Summer is great in Chicago.
Excellent. June and October. Those were the best months.
That was not long ago, yeah. That was a few weeks ago. Yeah, huh? Nice.
I can tell that you're thinking about asking a question.
Ask. Ask anything you want. You've been very patiently waiting. What would you like to talk about? Give me a topic and I'll talk about it.
Yeah, you asked. Can you tell us a little bit about your next book?
My next book? So my next book is called Play Nice. And it's about
Already suggesting nobody's going to.
it's about siblings. It's about late 30, early 40 siblings who have a very close-knit relationship, who've been through a lot of stuff together in their lives, who may or may not have each other's backs, and there is a murder within their close-knit family. And it's going to be like the other books. There's going to be a lot of, cat and mouse and who did what to whom, and people aren't quite what they seem. But I was trying to think of my next book, and I always ask my wife, her name is Susan, I always say, honey, just give me an idea. And she said, siblings. And I'm like, holy shit, that is a great idea, right? Because siblings do so much to each other. Like, they can be super great to each other. Like, they can be your most intimate, like, partner, right? Like, I've got your back. I know things even your spouses don't know about you because we grew up together. But they can also be super competitive and, like, the cruelest to each other. And I'm like, the moment she said that, it's like this whole frontier opened up, and I'm like, thank you for saying that because it was your idea. She
You have
literally
any?
just said siblings. Yeah, I have a sister who's 3.5, 4 years older than me. We don't have a difficult relationship like that at all. I'm not basing anything on my relationship with my sister. We have a really good relationship, but we don't agree politically, and that's become a problem. But we love each other, and we would do anything for each other. So it's no reflection on that. But I don't know. That really just opened up to, like, wow, talk about people being diabolical towards each other and deceitful, and I just felt like a whole world opened up. So
are you
Yeah.
in criminal court? Are you in civil court? Are you in appeals court?
I'm on the appeals court. I'm on the Illinois Appellate Court.
what
So
I
I'm on
thought.
the Intermediate Court of Appeals. So if you were convicted of a crime in Chicago, or if you were in a big civil case, we get a lot of big civil
Right.
litigation in Chicago, and you didn't like the outcome, you appeal to my court. And then I decide the appeal. So I get all the really awful crime out of Chicago.
So there's a constant swirling of potential plots all around.
Oh
you.
yeah, no, I mean the fodder, it's all there. I mean, I've seen so much crazy stuff. I don't see it at the trial level. I get the appeals, but I read all about it, and I
Probate
get
court
lots
is
of
a really
ideas.
fertile place to. It's unbelievable how families are. Really,
Oh, I mean, some of the craziest
Oh.
cases I get are divorce cases, just basic civil divorce cases, and I'll see people be so awful to each other. I'll see an ex and an ex just be so horrible to each other. When there are children involved, sometimes you're like, oh my God. And I'll read these criminal cases, and I'm like, sometimes the divorce cases are harder to read than the criminal cases, the murder cases, because of the stuff they put each other through or they put their children through. It's just like, whew. So, no, I get a lot. I get a lot of good ideas from out of Chicago. That's okay.
good
The
one
Clash-
tonight.
The Clash was a serious question, I thought.
Well, the clash is. However, so what's it like to write with a co-author like James Patterson? 'Cause you've done quite a few.
Yeah. So the question, can everybody hear these questions at home? The question is, what's it like to,
If you repeat,
the question is, what's it like to write with a co-author? So I think everyone does it differently. This is how Jim and I do it. Jim comes up with an idea for a book and then outlines every scene, every chapter. He thinks scenes. He doesn't use the word chapter. He says scenes. 100 scenes in a book, or in a movie, 100 scenes in his book, right? Chapters 1 through 96, 95, whatever. 2 or 3 sentences about each chapter, about each scene. This is what I want it to have all the way through. He shows it to me. He says, what do you think? I said, I'll tell him what I think. Usually I'm like, I don't know how you put together a whole outline like this because I'm unable to do that personally. Kudos. And then I might say, I noticed something here or something there. He's like, all right. And he might tweak it a little bit, and then it's like, all right, let's go with it. And then I write like 5 chapters at a time. I'll write the chapters as he outlined them. Again, like 2 or 3 sentences. Like, he might be like, this is where we meet the protagonist, and this is happening, and I want this to be really emotional. Or I want this to be really surprising. Whatever. It'll be like a little director's note to the actor, right? and then I'll act out the scene, and then he'll tell me if I acted it out okay. And if I didn't, he'll say whatever he needs to say. Like this time, like today I talked to him about the book we're writing, which is a crazy book that we're writing. It's like historical fiction. I've never done this in my life, but he and I are doing it. It's about Hitler. It's crazy. And he said I really like this. So it kind of flashes back and forth, this book we're doing. In the present time, which is very little of the book, he said, I really like what you're doing with that character. I really like her. So that's awesome. The past, the 1930s Germany stuff that you're doing, he said, I'm not loving everything about this character, so I want you to do this, this, and this. Like it'll be like that. And then I'll send it back, I'll rewrite it, and he'll be like, good or not. And if it's not good, he'll tell me. Like he's super nice, but he will not pass on something if he's not satisfied with it. Like he knows what his readers want, and if the chapter isn't to his liking, he will tell me to change it. Or he will reserve the right to change it himself, which he has done one time in the 15 years we've worked together, and it was on this book we're doing right now. There's a scene with Hitler that he didn't think I was getting right, so he rewrote it. And he did it well.
Were you happy with the rewrite?
Yeah.
Can't actually say,
I
right?
can't actually say. No, I could say. No, I mean, look, I kind of know my lane here, you know? Like he treats me like a complete equal. He would never want me to feel like he's the boss and I'm the employee. He would never want me to feel that way. Never talks that way. Always talks about we and let's do this. But at the end of the day, he is the final decision maker. And I trust him because he's so damn smart about this stuff. And he always says we're writing books that are not, Pulitzer Prize winners. And yet people keep buying his books, and they don't have to. No one has to buy his books, and they keep buying them in droves. That's not an accident. It's not just because his name is on it. There's too much other shit to read. Like, if you don't want to read him, you will not read him. People want to read him because he keeps his promise. And he's always got that foremost in his mind. He's like, and he'll always tell me that. It's like the reader is always from the viewpoint of the reader. The reader doesn't want to hear this much about that. Or there's not enough of that. Like, I need you to put me in the scene more. Like I'm writing about 1930s Germany. He's like, I'm not really in the scene. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what the roads were like in Germany in 1930s. He's like, well, then figure it out. They're cobblestone? Okay, they're cobblestone. I did. I went and figured that out. They're in Berlin, in Munich in 1930. They were cobblestone streets. I figured that out. But he'll be like, I can't. I'm not in this scene enough. Like he'll give me whatever. It's like a master class every time I talk to him. The guy just teaches me so much, and he's self-deprecating about it. He's like, yeah, no, I'm an okay writer, but he's a great storyteller, and he's like, the story is what matters to people. If you focus on the story, you will make the reader happy. And he's right. But like, you'd think I would figure all this stuff out. He has to keep saying it to me. But he's so good at what he does. And he's a very humble guy about the whole thing. He'll make fun of himself all the time. But he's brilliant. And so I've been so lucky to work with him. Like, I've just learned so much.
He's a real philanthropist, too.
Oh, my God, totally.
What do you read personally? So your downtime.
Like,
what?
Do I read and who do I read?
Do you even read?
Yeah, I mean, my dirty secret is I don't read very many books, and it's ridiculous. But I'm a full-time judge. I'm a 3/4 part-time writer. I write about 4 hours a day. I write from 3:30 in the morning till about 7 or 7:30, and then I'm done. That's it. And then I go be a judge. And I have 3 kids under 17, 14, and 12. So I don't have much time to read. When I read, who do I like? I'll keep this quick. I really like Megan Abbott. She's brilliant. I really like Tana French, the Irish writer. Just phenomenal. Ruth Ware. Everybody knows Ruth Ware, right? She's super popular. If I could give a shout out to a local writer, local for me, not you, Hannah Morrissey writes these books that are really, if you like noir, like she's a beautiful writer. Like her prose is beautiful, her character development. It's slow burn noir set in like a town called Black. Do you know Hannah Morrissey? Black Harbor. It's a fictional town, basically outside Milwaukee. A poor kind of. It's just she writes a really good noir stuff. She's brilliant. She's one of my new favorites, and she's a really just happens to be a really nice person. So yeah, those are the people I like. Ruth Ware and Megan Abbott have done a really good job. Megan Abbott more recently, Ruth Ware, her whole career of writing these books that are kind of what I call hothouse books. Like she'll pick a topic, a subject matter, where there's a little community of really intense people, and have someone get murdered and just see what happens. Like Megan Abbott has done like the world of like high school cheerleading, competitive dance, trying to get a patent in science. Ballet, yeah. She's done like 4 or 5 of these where you've got like these intense parents, these intense kids, and it's just perfect fodder for somebody to be murdered. What Ruth Ware does is she tries to create a little Agatha Christie, Murder on the Orient Express sort of thing where like someone in this room is a murderer. Ruth Ware set one book as a bachelorette party. They called it a hen party, right? Because it's in England.
Party is British for that.
Is British, yeah. But it was a bachelorette party where they're out in the woods and there was no cell phone, right? So they're all just there by themselves. One, they're out on a boat all by themselves, no cell coverage. The recent one is a reality show on an island. Same kind of idea. She like cuts you off from all civilization, gives you like 8 people, and like someone gets murdered. Who did it? And it's a really good device, and they're all really brilliant writers. So when I do have time to read, those are the people I try to read. But I just don't read that much, and it's really there's one thing I could change, it would be that.
Being an appellate judge is a lot of reading.
Being an appellate judge is
a lot of reading.
A lot of
Right,
reading.
right.
Different reading, of course, but
Right.
yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, David, this has been. Thank you for all sticking with our meandering discussion. But
Yes, we
It's really
meandered. I
been
tend
no,
to
it was
do
not
that.
your fault. It's totally mine. But it's because of the wine. I just have to, or maybe the French fries and the wine together. Carbon overload.
Good- it's a good
Anyway,
combo.
thank you very much for coming this evening, virtual audience. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's give David a round of applause.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks,
And it
everybody.
would- if he